At my father's retirement night, he raised his glass, praised his successful children, then looked straight at me and told me to leave. The room laughed. I stood there, burning with shame, until my wife rose beside me. She didn't argue or shout. She revealed something he never thought would surface, and the celebration began to collapse. Before I tell you exactly how that night unfolded and why nothing was ever the same after it, do me a small favor, support this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who may need them more than they realize. My name is Ethan Cross, and for most of my life, I existed as a footnote in my father's story. The night of his retirement, the city of Brookhaven was drenched in rain. The kind that turns streetlights into blurred halos and makes everything feel heavier than it already is. My wife, Lena, and I stepped out of the car in front of the Halcyon Grand Hotel, its glass entrance glowing warm and gold against the storm. Valets hurried past us, umbrellas snapping open, polished shoes splashing through shallow puddles. Inside, everything smelled like money and celebration, fresh flowers, expensive cologne, champagne already being poured. A massive banner hung above the ballroom entrance. Celebrating 35 years of leadership, Thomas Cross. My father. CEO. Visionary. Mentor. Every word people used to describe him felt sharp against my skin. I adjusted my jacket, suddenly aware of how ordinary it looked among the tailored suits and designer gowns flowing past us. Lena noticed immediately. She always did. "You okay?" she asked quietly, slipping her hand into mine. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. "Yeah. Just ready to get this over with." We checked in with the event coordinator, who smiled too brightly and handed us our table cards. Lena glanced at them first, then looked up at me, her expression shifting just slightly. "Table 19, she said. I frowned. 19? The ballroom stretched out before us in neat sections. Tables 1 through 5 were closest to the stage, executives, board members, donors. Table 19 was near the back, partially obscured by a decorative column and a tall artificial palm. I scanned the room instinctively, my eyes landing on the head table. My father sat there already, immaculate as ever, laughing with my stepmother, Veronica, and her daughter, Claire. Claire, 28, corporate lawyer, polished, ambitious. Everything my father admired. My name card was nowhere near them. Veronica caught sight of us and glided over, her smile sharp and rehearsed. "Ethan. Lena. You made it." "Of course," I said. "It's Dad's night." She tilted her head, eyes flicking briefly toward the stage. "Yes, well, we arranged seating by professional circles. We thought you'd be more comfortable with the educators." Educators. Plural. Like I wasn't her husband's son, just another category. "I see," I said quietly. Lena's grip on my hand tightened, but she said nothing. As we walked toward table 19, applause rippled through the room. My father had stood up to greet another group of executives. He didn't look in my direction. Not once. Table 19 was filled with teachers. People I recognized instantly, not by name, but by the tired kindness in their faces. Men and women who spent their days holding classrooms together with patience and underpaid dedication. They welcomed us warmly, scooting chairs, making space. "You must be Ethan," a woman said, smiling. "Your father mentioned you teach." "Yes," I replied. "High school literature." "That's wonderful," another teacher said sincerely. "We need more people like you." I smiled, but the compliment felt oddly heavy. Because I knew how my father talked about my career when cameras weren't around. Servers cleared their throats. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the room as the master of ceremonies approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we honor a man whose legacy has shaped this industry for over 3 decades. The applause was immediate, thunderous. My father rose slowly, basking in it. He looked exactly how he always did in moments like this, confident, measured, certain the room belonged to him. He waited for silence, then lifted his glass. "I've been asked many times," he said smoothly, "what I'm most proud of after 35 years. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. "My answer is simple," he continued. "The results. The people who carried my values forward. The children who truly amounted to something." The room chuckled again. Then his eyes found me. Not by accident. Not by chance. "You," he said, pointing slightly with his glass. "You can step aside now." The sound vanished. Forks froze midair. Conversations died in throats. Even the servers stopped moving. For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. My ears rang, my heart slamming so hard it felt physical. I glanced around, half expecting someone to laugh it off as a joke. No one did. My father smiled faintly, as if he'd just delivered a clever line. I pushed my chair back and stood, legs unsteady, heat crawling up my neck. Every camera in the room seemed to turn toward me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. I took one step back from the table. And then Lena stood up beside me. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just calmly, deliberately. I turned toward her, shaken. "Lena." "Not yet," she said softly, her voice steady enough to anchor me. She picked up her clutch, slid her phone into her hand, and looked toward the stage. My father cleared his throat, uncomfortable now. "Ethan," he said, his tone tightening. "Let's not make this awkward." But it was already too late. Something had shifted. I could feel it in the air, the subtle tension, the uncertainty rippling through the crowd. A few people glanced down at their phones. One man near the head table frowned at his screen. Lena squeezed my hand. "Just stay," she whispered. So I did. And as my father raised his glass again, trying to reclaim the moment, I realized something for the first time in my life. He thought he was in control. He had no idea what was about to come next. My father tried to recover quickly. He always did. He laughed lightly, tapping his glass again as if the tension were nothing more than a hiccup in an otherwise flawless evening. "Families," he said, smiling at the crowd. "They keep us humble." A few people chuckled, unsure. The laughter sounded thin, forced. The spell had cracked. I remained standing beside Lena, my heart still racing. I could feel every eye in the room flicking between us and the stage. The teachers at our table looked stunned, confused, offended on my behalf. One of them reached out and touched my arm gently, a quiet gesture of solidarity that nearly undid me. Lena didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on my father. Across the ballroom, Veronica leaned toward him, whispering urgently. Claire's confident posture faltered for the first time all night. She glanced down at her phone, then back up, her smile stiff. Something was happening. I didn't know what Lena had planned. She hadn't told me. She hadn't needed to. All I knew was that she had been calm from the moment we arrived, as if she were waiting for a cue only she could hear. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat. "Well," he said awkwardly, "perhaps we'll continue with the program." "Excuse me," Lena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through the room. Every head turned. She stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she moved into the aisle. For a heartbeat, no one stopped her. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. My father blinked. "And you are?" he asked, irritation creeping into his tone. Lena smiled politely. "I'm Ethan's wife." That earned a ripple of murmurs. "And," she continued, "I'm also the person who's been reviewing your foundation's external partnerships for the last 8 months. Silence dropped hard. My father's smile twitched. "I'm not sure this is the appropriate." Clause 9.4, Lena said calmly. Public transparency requirements for leadership transitions. A man near the head table stiffened. I recognized him vaguely, Dr. Harris, one of the senior trustees. He glanced down at his phone again, his expression sharpening. Veronica stood abruptly. "This is highly inappropriate," she snapped. "Security. Please don't," Lena said, still calm. "This will only take a moment. And it's better for everyone if it happens now." The projector behind the stage flickered. Then the screen changed. A document appeared, crisp and unmistakably official. The header bore the name of my father's foundation. Beneath it, highlighted in yellow, was a paragraph. A collective murmur rolled through the ballroom. My father turned slowly, staring at the screen. "What is this?" he demanded. Lena's voice didn't waver. "It's the funding agreement you signed last year with the Northbridge Education Alliance. The same one you've been praising all evening." Dr. Harris stood. "Thomas," he said carefully, "why does this clause specify that at least one active classroom educator must be appointed to the board before any retirement transition is finalized?" The room erupted into whispers. Claire's face drained of color. "That's a standard advisory note," my father said quickly. "It doesn't." "It does," Lena replied. "It's binding. And it requires written approval from the Alliance before any leadership announcement." Dr. Harris looked at his phone again. "I just checked my email. Approval wasn't granted." The master of ceremonies stepped back from the podium, suddenly irrelevant. Veronica's voice shook. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Lena said softly. "This is oversight." I felt something shift inside me, not triumph, not relief, but clarity. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't waiting for permission to exist in that space. My father turned toward me, eyes blazing. "You set this up." I met his gaze. "No. I just stopped covering for you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lena stepped closer to the stage. "There's more," she said. The screen changed again. Side-by-side documents appeared. One labeled Strategic Growth Initiative, Claire Cross. The other, my proposal. The one I'd spent years refining. The one my father had dismissed as too idealistic. Highlighted sections glowed across both pages. Identical language. Identical structure. A stunned hush fell. Dr. Harris inhaled sharply. This is identical. Claire shook her head. That's not, it's common phrasing. 43% overlap, Lena said. Including original case studies Ethan wrote while teaching full-time. My father staggered back a step, as if struck. For years, I'd wondered if my work mattered. If the nights spent grading papers, writing proposals after midnight, believing education deserved better, if any of it meant anything. Now it was projected 10 feet tall. Ethan, Dr. Harris said quietly, is this true? I nodded once. Yes. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It wasn't celebratory. It was stunned. My father's voice cracked. You're destroying everything I built. Lena turned to him. No. We're showing what it was built on. Reporters surged forward. Phones rose. The ballroom buzzed with the sound of something irreversible unfolding. I looked around at the teachers from table 19. They were standing now. One by one. Not shouting. Just standing. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being told to leave. I was the reason the room had changed. The applause didn't last long. It never does when people realize they're clapping at the edge of something dangerous. The room fractured into motion, chairs scraping back, whispers colliding, phones lifted higher. Reporters who'd been lingering politely near the back surged forward like a tide that had finally been given permission to move. The teachers from table 19 stayed standing, unsure what to do next, but unwilling to sit back down as if nothing had happened. My father stood frozen at the center of it all. For a man who had spent his entire career controlling rooms, shaping narratives, bending attention toward himself with ease, the sudden loss of that control was visible on his face. His mouth opened once, then closed. He looked smaller somehow, like the lights had dimmed only on him. Veronica recovered first. She always did. This is outrageous, she snapped, her voice slicing through the noise as she stepped toward Lena. You had no right to ambush this event. This is a private family matter. Lena didn't raise her voice. You made it public when you put him on stage. Veronica's eyes flicked to me, sharp and resentful. This is about jealousy. About bitterness. He couldn't live up to expectations, so now. Stop, Dr. Harris said firmly. That single word carried more authority than anything Veronica had said all night. He turned toward the audience, his face tight but composed. I think it's clear we need to pause the evening's program. The master of ceremonies nodded quickly, relieved to have someone else take charge. My father found his voice then. This is ridiculous, he said, louder now, the familiar edge returning. These documents are being taken out of context. Anyone who understands leadership knows that. Leadership, Lena said, starts with accountability. That word landed hard. Someone near the stage laughed nervously. Someone else swore under their breath. The orchestra, forgotten in the corner, lowered their instruments one by one. I finally sat down. Not because I was shrinking, but because my legs felt like they might give out. Lena returned to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder. Her calm steadied me. I realized then how much she'd been carrying alone, reviewing contracts late at night, asking careful questions, preparing for a moment she knew might come even if I didn't. Are you okay? She asked quietly. I nodded. Yeah. I think I am. Across the room, Claire stood rigid, her phone clutched in both hands. She looked younger than she had when we arrived. Less polished. More exposed. A man in a dark suit leaned toward her, whispering urgently. Her eyes darted toward my father, then back to the screen behind the stage, where the documents still glowed like a verdict. This is a misunderstanding, she said suddenly, stepping forward. I collaborated on those drafts. Ethan and I discussed. We did, I said. Every head turned toward me. But you never asked permission to use them, I continued, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. You never credited me. And when I raised concerns, I was told to be grateful for the exposure. A murmur swept the room again. Claire's face flushed. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. My father rounded on me. Enough, he snapped. You've made your point. I met his gaze. No. I finally made yours. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. For a moment, he looked like he might shout. Instead, he laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that didn't reach his eyes. So this is how you repay me, he said. After everything I gave you. That familiar phrase. The one he'd used my entire life. I took a breath. You gave me expectations. Conditions. Silence when I needed support. And tonight, you gave me clarity. That finally broke something. He turned away from me, scanning the room, the cameras, the faces that had once looked at him with unquestioning admiration. Now there was curiosity there. Doubt. Calculation. Dr. Harris cleared his throat again. Thomas, he said, we're going to need to suspend the announcement until the board reviews these findings. Veronica stiffened. You can't be serious. I am, he replied. Effective immediately. The words echoed. My father's shoulders sagged a fraction. Just enough for me to notice. Security approached cautiously, unsure who they were meant to escort, us or him. We'll take a short recess, Dr. Harris announced. Please remain seated. No one listened. Clusters formed instantly, donors whispering to advisors, trustees huddled over phones, reporters narrating live updates under their breath. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed too loudly, the sound brittle and strained. I looked at Lena. Did you know it would go this far? She shook her head. I knew the truth would matter. What people did with it, that was always out of our hands. My father finally turned back to us. The anger had drained from his face, replaced by something colder. You planned this, he said quietly. You waited for this moment. Lena didn't flinch. We waited for honesty. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You think this makes you right? I think it makes us done, I said. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the son who used to fold under that look. He didn't find him. Enjoy your moment, he said finally. It won't last. Then he walked away. Veronica followed, heels clicking sharply against the marble. Claire lingered for a heartbeat longer, her eyes flicking toward me, not with hatred, but with something like fear. When they disappeared into the crowd, the room exhaled. A woman from table 19 approached me, her eyes shining. Thank you, she said simply. For what? I asked. For reminding them that teachers exist, she replied. More people came then. Quiet words. Gentle nods. Hands squeezed. Not praise, recognition. Dr. Harris returned, his expression weary but resolute. Ethan, he said, we'll be reaching out. There's a lot to review. I understand, I said. And Lena, he added, turning to her, thank you for bringing this forward. She inclined her head. It was time. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the ballroom looked different. Less grand. Less intimidating. Just a room full of people who'd witnessed something they hadn't expected. We gathered our things quietly. No one stopped us as we walked out. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. The city lights reflected off the pavement, blurred and soft. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in. You okay? Lena asked again. I thought about the years of swallowing words. Of shrinking. Of believing I was less because someone else said so. I think, I said slowly, I just stopped being afraid. She smiled. And somewhere behind us, in that glittering room, a legacy was unraveling, thread by thread, while mine was only just beginning to take shape. The fallout didn't wait for morning. By the time Lena and I reached home that night, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Messages stacked on top of one another until the screen blurred, missed calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, texts from colleagues who had been watching the live coverage, notifications from news outlets already running headlines with my father's name in bold letters. I didn't open any of them. Lena poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of me. We sat at the kitchen table in silence, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between us. My hands were still shaking, though I hadn't noticed until I wrapped them around the glass. You don't have to respond tonight, she said gently. I know, I replied. I just didn't think it would spread that fast. She gave a small, knowing smile. It was always going to. I finally unlocked my phone and scrolled. The headlines were surreal, stripped of emotion and reduced to spectacle. Retirement gala erupts after shocking disclosure. Foundation leadership under review after contract breach. Teachers' work exposes internal conflict at major charity. My father's name was everywhere. For years, I'd watched him command attention with ease. Now, that same spotlight was turning harsh, unforgiving. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for managing it. The next morning, the calls started early. My mother rang just after 7. I let it go to voicemail. Then my aunt. Then my uncle. Then a cousin I barely recognized by name. I muted the phone and went for a walk instead. The city felt different that day. Not quieter, if anything, it was louder, but the noise didn't seem aimed at me anymore. People passed by, unaware, living their lives, and I realized something that felt almost shocking in its simplicity. The world didn't revolve around my father. When I returned home, Lena was already at her laptop, her expression focused. They've scheduled an emergency board meeting, she said without looking up. And the Alliance has issued a preliminary statement. I sat across from her. What does it say? She turned the screen toward me. The statement was careful, neutral, but unmistakable. It confirmed that the partnership was under review pending investigation into compliance failures and intellectual property concerns. They're taking this seriously, I said. They have to, she replied. There's too much evidence. By midday, my father finally called me directly. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before answering. What do you want? I asked. His voice sounded different, lower, strained. We need to talk. I think we've done enough talking, I said. This isn't about last night, he snapped. This is about damage control. I almost laughed. That figures. Your little performance has consequences, he continued. You've embarrassed people. You've jeopardized years of work. You did that, I said evenly. Not me. There was a pause. I could picture him pacing, jaw tight, anger barely contained. You think this ends well for you, he said. You think people will trust you after this? I looked at Lena, who was listening quietly from across the room. I don't need everyone to trust me, I replied. Just the ones who matter. He hung up without another word. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. The investigation moved quickly. Too quickly for anyone who had assumed the Foundation's reputation would shield it. Emails surfaced. Drafts were compared. The overlap between my work and Claire's proposals was undeniable. The clauses Lena had referenced were cited repeatedly, dissected in meetings and reports. Within a week, the board suspended all leadership decisions pending review. Within 2 weeks, my father stepped down, temporarily. The press called it a strategic pause. I called it inevitable. My parents didn't visit. They didn't apologize. They sent a single text asking for space. I gave it to them gladly. At school, the reaction was different. Colleagues stopped me in the hallway, offering quiet words of support. Students whispered excitedly, having seen clips online, though most didn't fully understand what had happened. One afternoon, a senior lingered after class. Mr. Cross, he said hesitantly, was that really you on the news? Yes, I said, bracing myself. He nodded slowly. My dad says teachers never stand up for themselves. I showed him you. Something tightened in my chest. Thanks, I said quietly. That night, Lena and I sat on the couch, the TV muted, news footage flickering silently across the screen. Do you regret it? She asked. I thought about the moment my father had told me to leave. The heat in my chest. The years of silence before that. No, I said. I regret waiting as long as I did. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time since the gala, I let myself relax. A month later, the final announcement came. The Alliance withdrew its funding permanently. The Foundation announced a restructuring under new oversight. My father's name was removed from the organization's public materials, pending further review. Claire took a leave of absence from her firm. Veronica disappeared from public view entirely. My father didn't call again. Instead, a letter arrived. It was short. Typed. Formal. He wrote that he never intended to hurt me. That pressure led him to make decisions he now questioned. That perhaps he had been too focused on outcomes and not enough on people. He didn't apologize. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger. Out of finality. Life settled into something quieter after that. Lena returned to her work, her role expanding now that her integrity had been proven publicly. I stayed in the classroom, exactly where I wanted to be. We stopped being asked for interviews. The headlines faded. One evening, as we walked home together, Lena slipped her hand into mine. You know, she said, people are still taking notice of you. Not him. I smiled. That's new. Get used to it, she replied. I thought about my father then, not with bitterness, but with distance. He had built a life on being admired. I was building one on being honest. The difference mattered. And as the city lights came on around us, I understood something I'd never been taught growing up. Being told to leave isn't the same as being erased. Sometimes, it's the moment you finally step into your own place. The months after everything unraveled felt unreal, like living in the quiet after a storm that had torn through every familiar structure in my life. People expected drama to continue, more statements, more confrontations, more spectacle. Instead, what came was something far more unsettling at first: calm. Not peace. Not closure. Just calm. The Foundation announced a complete overhaul under independent oversight. Grants were frozen, audits initiated, committees reshuffled. Every press release used careful language, but the meaning was clear to anyone paying attention. My father's era was over. Not with a triumphant ending, not with applause, but with footnotes and investigations. He didn't fight it publicly. That surprised many people. It surprised me too. For years, I'd believed he would burn everything down rather than surrender control. But watching his name slowly disappear from letterheads and websites seemed to drain something vital from him. He stopped giving interviews. He stopped attending events. The man who once thrived on stages retreated into silence. We didn't speak. At first, that silence felt heavy, like an unfinished sentence hanging between us. Then, gradually, it began to feel like space, room to breathe where there had never been any before. Lena and I settled into routines that had nothing to do with scandals or headlines. Morning coffee at the same corner cafe. Evening walks without checking our phones every 5 minutes. Dinners where we talked about ordinary things, students, books, plans we'd put off because life had always felt like it was waiting for permission to start. One evening, I sat at my desk grading essays when I came across a line that made me pause. A student had written about legacy. About how some people inherit names, while others inherit expectations. About how the weight of those expectations can either crush you or force you to become something entirely your own. I stared at the words for a long time. That student didn't know it, but they had described my entire life in one paragraph. At school, the attention faded slowly. Students stopped whispering. Colleagues stopped asking careful questions. I returned to being what I'd always been, a teacher. And I found that I loved that return more than I expected. One afternoon, a colleague stopped by my classroom after the bell. "You know," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "a lot of people thought you'd use all this to jump ship. Consulting, speaking tours, something flashy." I smiled. "I already have the job I want." She nodded. "That's rare." "It shouldn't be," I replied. At home, Lena was busier than ever. Her work expanded, not because she chased recognition, but because people sought her out now, trusting her judgment. I watched her handle meetings with the same calm precision she'd shown that night at the gala. No gloating. No grandstanding. Just clarity. One night, as we sat on the couch scrolling through old photos on her phone, she paused on one from years ago, me standing awkwardly beside my father at an event, half smiling, unsure where to put my hands. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The idea of him, I mean. Not who he was. Who you hoped he'd be." I considered that. "I miss the hope," I said finally. "But I don't miss living inside it." She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. A few weeks later, I ran into my father unexpectedly. I was leaving the bookstore downtown, a stack of paperbacks under my arm, when I saw him standing near the window display. He looked thinner. Older. The confidence that once filled every line of his posture had softened into something more tentative. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he turned and saw me. "Ethan," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. "Dad," I replied. We stood there, the space between us filled with everything we hadn't said. Passers-by moved around us, unaware they were brushing past a history that had shaped both our lives. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said. "I live here," I answered simply. He nodded, eyes dropping to the books in my arms. "Teaching still?" "Yes." Another nod. "Good." The word hung between us, strange and unfamiliar. I wanted to say, he hesitated, then exhaled. "I didn't handle things well. That night? Or before?" It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was closer than anything I'd heard before. "I know," I said. He looked at me, searching my face for something, anger, triumph, blame. I gave him none. "I hope you're happy," he said at last. "I am," I replied. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever could. We parted without shaking hands, without promises of reconciliation. Just two people walking in different directions, finally aware that the road between them no longer needed to be crossed. When I got home, Lena looked up from the kitchen. "You're late," she said. "I ran into him," I replied. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. "How do you feel?" she asked. I set the books down and thought for a moment. Lighter. That was the truth. Time continued doing what it always does, softening edges, clarifying shapes. The scandal became a case study in ethics seminars. The gala night turned into a reference point journalists used when talking about transparency and accountability. My father's name became something people mentioned carefully, as if unsure which version of the story they were allowed to remember. I focused on my classroom. On the students who reminded me daily why I chose this life. On the quiet satisfaction of watching someone understand something they hadn't before. On the knowledge that impact doesn't need applause to be real. 1 year after the retirement dinner, Lena and I hosted a small gathering at our apartment. Nothing extravagant. Just friends, colleagues, a few teachers from my school. No speeches. No toasts about legacy. At one point, someone asked me if I'd ever tell my students the full story. I shook my head. They don't need the details. They just need to see that standing up doesn't always look loud. Later that night, after everyone left and the city settled into its familiar hum, I stood by the window looking out at the lights. I thought about the moment my father had told me to step aside. How that single sentence had once felt like confirmation of every fear I carried. How close I'd come to walking away quietly, just like I always had. And then I thought about Lena standing beside me. Calm. Certain. Unafraid of what truth might cost. That night didn't destroy me. It clarified me. It showed me that being dismissed doesn't define you, what you do next does. That you don't have to inherit someone else's measure of success. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of applause is refuse to leave when you're told you don't belong. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. And if any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or less than by someone whose approval you were taught to seek, remember this: your worth isn't decided at someone else's table. Before you go, do me a small favor. Support the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this travel farther when people speak up, and sometimes knowing someone is listening is exactly what helps us keep standing.